I thought, okay, there's a little heavy energy right now in my heart, and of course, I think I need to tell a joke just so I can lighten up just a little, and then we'll move forward. And please forgive this very anthropomorphic view of God, but we're just going to work with it today, okay, for joke purposes. One day, God called Jesus and his helpers into a meeting, and God said that he wanted them to create a database on heaven's supercomputer. And he said he wanted them to list everyone who had ever been born and all the good and bad things that each had done since the beginning of time. And they all said they could do that, and so they sat at their keyboards for hours, days, and weeks. Finally, they were almost done when there was a power failure in heaven. And the computers all went down. And only seconds later, the lights came back on, and all the computers started to reboot. And there was much crying, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, and pounding of keyboards as this happened. And so down at the end of the table sat Jesus with a big smile on his face. And why was Jesus smiling amongst all this dismay? Jesus saves. But I could have a little Jesus humor this morning. So this is the last in our series of our Metaphysical Masters series, and we're featuring Emmett Fox. And typically I would give you this long kind of litany about Emmett Fox's life, and I'm really going to just ask you just to go to the internet if you'd like to do that, because there's a lot more I want to say and share with you this morning. But I will let you know that he was a divine science minister, he was a mystic, he was an author, he was a teacher, he was a speaker. He was really brilliant, and he had a church that reached 8,000 attendees on Easter Sundays in New York City. He was born in England, and he came here, and Florence Scovel Shinn, if you remember Florence Scovel Shinn, who metaphysical master that I talked about in May, gave him his first break when she said, Emmett, would you speak for me at my church, because I'm going out of town? And people just fell in love with him, and that was the beginning of his career. And so he is most known, I think, for the Sermon on the Mount book that he wrote and the pamphlet, The Golden Key. So today, I'm really trying hard to keep it together today. And thank you for just sending me some energy, because I have a lot to share. And my heart is heavy this morning because of the events of this week. And so I wanted to talk about initially, before everything kind of came to a head, the whole idea of non-resistance. And I kept that because I think that's really important. And I want to share some thoughts from Emmett Fox. And then I want to go into another part of Jesus' teaching. So I kind of named the talk, Resist Not, which Keisha thought that's what it was. And then Jesus' wisdom for today, I kind of expanded it a little bit. So this week, the shootings of two young black men, Alton Sterling and Philandro Castile, and the mass shooting of police officer in Dallas leave us kind of numb and feeling angry, and for many feeling powerless and hopeless. And so what I'd like to do is let's translate that. Let's look at what we can do, folks, using the spiritual principles that we talk about every week. Okay? So the Sermon on the Mount is where we're taking the wisdom. And for those of you that might not know, this was Jesus' longest discourse in the Bible, where he had very rich teachings. And the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, and many of his precepts. And precepts are just instructions, such as do not worry, let your light shine. And we're going to delve into one of his precepts from Matthew 5, verses 38 and 39 this morning. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. So, this was a very radical teaching in Jesus' day. because the old law was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, meaning that if someone killed someone, they would be killed. If someone plucked somebody's eye, lovely thought, pluck somebody's eye or cut off their hand, the same would happen to them. And so when you think about a more primal society, this was at least some kind of structure to avoid total anarchy, okay? And so as this society started to evolve, more laws came into place that were more just, more civilized. However, what Emmett Fox says is that there's still a consciousness alive in us today of an eye for an eye. That somehow when we are hurt and something horrible happens, that the way to have justice is to fight back. The way to somehow feel better about our loss is to seek revenge. And we've seen that play out this week. And so this radical teaching that Jesus is saying here is turn the other cheek. So if someone slaps you on the cheek, you're supposed to turn and open yourself, it may seem, to being slapped on the other cheek. But do you see? Turn the other cheek. What happens when we turn the other cheek? We're shifting directions. We're seeing in another direction, you see. So the metaphysical teaching in Jesus' teaching is, as we turn the other cheek, we shift our perspective. We change our mind. We open up to another way. See? And see, that non-resistance, folks, is not a passive thing. Non-resistance is claiming our ability to respond, our responsibility, our ability to respond. Non-resistance is when we step back, we breathe, we bear witness, and we make a conscious choice about what is ours to do. And see, we can do that. We can do that even in the midst of the most horrendous circumstance outside of us. That's the teaching, that when we turn the other cheek, we can see it differently. We can respond differently. We can do that. And so that is what he is calling us to be and to do. He is saying, do not resist the actions, meaning, how can we, and might say, how can we not resist what happened this week? But when we resist, what he's saying is, don't push against it. See, when we push against something, how do we start a fire? Yeah, that's what he's saying. Don't push against it. Because what we know, folks, is that the consciousness that created the events of this past week, they are rooted in a belief in separation. They are rooted in fear. And what he is saying is, turn the other cheek, shift the consciousness from which you come. Because what we know, nothing is ever solved from the consciousness from which it was created. If we want it to be different, we've got to be different. We've got to act differently. That's what Jesus is saying. That is our opportunity to embrace non-resistance. resistance, the ability to bear witness and to not get in the pea soup of what's happening, you see, the density. And that's why I always recommend, if you're going to watch the news, do not make a decision about what you're going to do or what you're going to think about it for at least 24 hours. Because what we see and what we hear is the hype of the media in all of this. And the responses of others. And absolutely, it's heartbreaking. But what Jesus is saying is, folks, if we are going to shift the direction of our planet, we have got to turn the other cheek. We have got to shift how we see things and to respond differently. Okay, so that's our foundation of being. So I was also looking on Facebook, and I was noticing the responses of clergy. That's what I really spent some time reading. And there was a post, and I believe Keisha posted it. Thank you, Keisha, wherever you are. That was titled, "The Ask." And what it was a female clergy woman that said, I am asking for clergy to join together today and to speak publicly about racial division in our world and to ground that teaching, that awareness, in Jesus' teaching and parable of the Good Samaritan. So I thought, yeah, there we go. That's what I want to share with you. So in this space of non-resistance, I wanted to share with you Jesus' wisdom. And I wanted to share this story. You might be familiar with it, but I wanted to share it from Luke. Chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. And she also, I wanted to plant the seed before I read this story. She also asked us to ask the question as a congregation and as individuals, to answer the question, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? So I just invite you to take that question in your heart as you hear this parable. Just then a scribe stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So this story has multiple levels. I could do a whole talk on this alone, on the laws that were in place at the time, the historical perspective, I will give you a little insight about the scribes. They were members of a learned class in ancient Israel who interpreted and taught Jewish scripture. They were given power to enforce rules for human conduct and religious practices with the binding authority as law. So this was the person that was addressing Jesus. And so the Levites were from the tribe of Levi. They were two groups of Levites. One group descended from Aaron and were the priests who offered burnt offerings and led the people in worship. And the other group took care of the temple and performed other religious duties. So they were religious men. And then came the Samaritan man. So a little background on Samaritans. During this time, they were greatly hated by the Jewish people. They were the race of people who came out of the Jews being held in Assyria. They were impure, having mixed blood, and were part of a nation hated by the Jews. That was how they were seen. And the Samaritans knew they were hated. So the Samaritan man is the one who stopped to help the man that had been beaten, and this man was probably a Jewish man. So the Samaritan extends way beyond what most people might do to a stranger, much less a person that knew he was hated. And can you see how major this was for Jesus to suggest to this learned keeper of the law, this scribe, that a Samaritan was his neighbor? So, folks, what does this mean for us today? How can we learn from this? So I think this is a wonderful reminder of what we can express in the world when we are non-resistant and we come from unconditional love. See, this Samaritan man demonstrated unconditional love. And if the Samaritan man saw the religious men, the spiritual authority of the day, walk past that struggling man, he did not let that deter him. See, his authority was not outside of him. His authority was the love that he was. He did not let the outer determine the level of love and compassion that he extended. So I think the Good Samaritan is the good model for us. See, in each of us, folks, is the Good Samaritan. Each of us has the ability to love. Each of us does. So I asked Vera to arrange the chairs in this way because it felt really important to me today for us to see each other, for us to look in each other's eyes and see community, and to see the love that we are. And one of the things that I cherish about this community is that there's diversity here. The way we show up, in our human form is so beautiful and so diverse. And we get to see some of that here, and I'm so grateful. And I feel like I'm talking to the choir here, because I know that each of you are beautiful, good-hearted people, and you get it. The thing is, folks, we are living in a world where people are walking past people on the sidewalk. And people resist when they don't feel safe, and they don't feel like their comfort needs are met, and they don't feel free. And there are people in this room that can walk down the street and not feel safe and not feel free or comfortable simply because of the color of their skin. And that is not okay. And so, what I am asking this morning as we look at each other, I am asking, what is ours to do? Because, folks, we can sit in prayer and we can have moments of silence. And believe me, prayer is a powerful, powerful thing. Please don't hear that I am undermining the power of prayer. And we get to put feet on our prayers. It is time. Because, Unity, bless its heart, has not had the greatest social justice record in the world. And folks, our world is calling. And I am not asking from, oh my God, this is horrible, this is wrong. Truly, I am doing my best, and as you can see, I'm in my process of claiming non-resistance so that I can be effective. See, folks, if we're resisting the situation, we're not as effective as we can be. We can't be. So I am going to ask that you be in discernment about what we can do as a community so that all people know that they are loved, that they are love, regardless of who they love, regardless of what color they are, regardless of anything in this world. And I am going to ask that if you are in a social situation where someone is talking about someone in a disparaging way, that you take a stand. And you do it in a non-resistant, grounded way. And you do it from the love that you are, but you let them know it's not okay. That you are a stand for love, that you are a stand for oneness, and that includes them. And that you embrace this idea of non-resistance, because, folks, I know that still is a very radical teaching. And just notice where you're, and that was another thing, because sometimes, when we rearrange a configuration, people get really resistant. Well, where's my chair? This isn't right. I'm having to turn my head to look at the PowerPoint, and I can't see the band. Of course, you guys are all love and light. You didn't do any of that. I was trying to prove a point, and we blew it. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, but just notice if that did stir you a little bit, and to see if you can put that in perspective. Always go deeper. Okay? So let's breathe. And take the hand of your neighbor, if you would. Just take your hand. That's why I wanted you to kind of squeeze in. And would you look at your neighbor? And I know this might feel really vulnerable, but here we are. I'm going to ask you to say, "You are my neighbor. I love you." Yeah. So see, folks, the thing is, this is the way the world gets to be. What's in this room, this is the way the world gets to be. And folks, we're the ones. We're the ones. So I love you, and I'm with you. And let's be the change we want to see. Okay? So I want to hear in my email what your ideas are. What is ours to do? We can go down and we can be in nonviolent protest. I love wearing a sign. Yeah. Norma Ray's in my blood, so I'm just saying. But really, you know what I mean. Okay. So one more time, just breathe together, look at each other, love each other up. Remember this, and let's affirm the truth together. Grounded in love and non-resistance, I am in action to be the change I want to see in the world. And so it is. Thank you.